you have written your entire paper, but you're not quite done yet. You wouldn't serve an important meal without tasting it first. You wouldn't buy a car without test driving it. And you wouldn't jump into a pool without making sure there was water in the pool. That's a true story. My father, as a teenager, totally jumped into an empty pool and broke his nose. So, you would not submit a final draft of a paper without first carefully revising and editing it. So, that's what we'll talk about for our final video in the series. Now, what's the difference between revising and editing? Because you need to do both at this stage of the process. So, revising is kind of bigger picture. It's when you're looking at what we call the higher order concerns, things like the quality of your content, your organization, does it flow well? All of those kinds of matters have to do with the revision process. Whereas the editing process is more dotting your I's and crossing your T's. Is everything spelled correctly? Does my grammar look good? Is my punctuation good? Am I capitalizing everything that I need to be capitalizing? Those kinds of details. So obviously you're going to go through and revise first before you edit, because when you're revising, you might decide there's a couple sentences here and there that you're taking out, or things that you're moving around, or things that you need to add. So you want to make sure that all of that is put together before you then start actually editing the paper. And once you've done those two, then you're ready to go. Now, I've created a handy dandy revision and editing checklist that you can use to make sure that you have covered all of your bases. So let's have a close look at this checklist. Here it is, our revision and editing checklist, which touches upon things we've discussed in all of the video lessons throughout this writing process series, as well as the APA series, the academic research series, and the writing with a formal tone series. Let's start by looking at just the revision portion, since you'll be working on revision first. Content and organization. My introduction includes an academic hook, sufficient background information, and a one-sentence thesis statement at the end. My thesis statement makes an argument, chooses a side, and is specific enough. My topic sentences all clearly introduce a new subtopic supporting my thesis, and none of my subtopics overlap with another. Starting with the second topic sentence, my topic sentences include sophisticated transitions. Each body paragraph contains sufficient supporting evidence that backs up my topic sentence. The supporting evidence in my body paragraphs does not rely on assumptions, generalizations, personal anecdotes, or faulty logic. My conclusion restates my thesis in a new way and leaves my reader with a sense of the significance of my argument. Okay, now let's take a look at research. I use the minimum required number of sources in my paper. Some of my references are academic, peer-reviewed articles from scholarly journals, i.e. from the library databases. My website references are only from .org, .gov, or .edu URLs. I use more than one source per body paragraph. I use the quote sandwich formula for all of my quotes and paraphrases. And I do more paraphrasing than quoting. Of course, there would be exceptions to that depending on what type of paper you are writing, but for an informative or an argumentative paper, you would definitely have more paraphrasing than quoting. Now let's take a look at the editing portion of the checklist, which you can start tackling once you've already addressed the revision process. So let's look first at style issues. My paper includes no personal pronouns, so these include I, me, my, mine, you, your, yours, we, us, our, or ours. My paper includes no contractions, such as don't, can't, won't, haven't, etc. My paper includes no vague or cliche words or phrases, such as a lot, huge, good, more and more. As a matter of fact, all in all, at the end of the day, this day and age, etc. There are many of these types of phrases. None of my sentences are unnecessarily wordy. My overall tone is formal. It never sounds like I'm having a chat with my reader. Okay, so moving on to all the little details about APA. My document is formatted in APA style with 1-inch margins, Times New Roman 12-point font, double spacing, page numbering, a title page, and indented paragraphs. My references are on a separate page at the end of my document. My references are listed in alphabetical order. I include a reference entry for every single source that I cite in the paper. And every single source that is in my references is cited at least once in my paper. My references are formatted in correct APA style. All of my quoted sentences include a citation, and all my citations for those quotes include the following: the last names of the author or authors, or the name of the organization if there was no author available, the year or ND if no date is available, and the page number, or if there were no page numbers, the paragraph number. All of my paraphrases also include a citation, and all my citations for the paraphrases include the following: the last name of the author or authors, or the organization name if there was no author, and the year or ND if there was no date provided. Now, of course, if you were writing a paper using a different documentation style, such as MLA, for example, you would go by the guidelines of that documentation style, but whichever you are required to use for your paper, you need to make sure to double check everything. Not quite done. There's one final little category in the editing portion: grammar and mechanics. We can't forget grammar, and there are so many different types of grammar errors that one could make, but here are the basics. My paper does not contain any fragments, in other words, incomplete sentences, run-on sentences, or awkward and confusing sentence constructions. My paper does not contain any capitalization errors, and my paper does not contain any spelling errors. One final tip here: don't rush into your revision and editing right after you've completed the rough draft, because what you wrote is still too fresh in your mind for you to spot a lot of the things that you would otherwise realize need work. So finish a rough draft and then sleep on it. When you come back, then go through it carefully and do all the revising that you need. And then if you still have time, I would definitely sleep on it again and come back to it for the editing part of the process, and you'll start to spot a lot more of those little mistakes that you otherwise would probably have missed. Okay, so as you can see, writing is indeed quite a process, but it's one that can be very rewarding when you've put that much time and work and effort into something and you see it pay off in a really quality piece of writing. And the more that you engage in this writing process over time, the more natural that it will become, and your brain will just kind of switch into that mode. So it does get easier. And I hope that this series has been helpful for your immediate future, for any assignments that you're working on, and also for your more long-term future moving forward in your career. It's been a pleasure. Farewell.